Liverpool girl who inspired them.
It's a story of loss and love. A little girl from Liverpool's letter to her father and a giant who came to find her. It was such a simple thing to do. A child's letter to her father. If he'd received it, we'd never have known about it. But he didn't. And so begins a story on a giant scale.
BBC Radio Merseyside.
Good morning. The streets of Liverpool are being taken over by 3 giant puppets inspired by the story of the Titanic. The Sea Oddysey is the work of French company Deluxe.
I just seen it just take off and just dived out the way.
It's going to be like a little girl as big as the larger building walking around the city.
This is La Petite Géante, the little girl giant, and her dog Cholo. They're asleep now, but soon they're going to wake up an enchanted city.
It's amazing, absolutely. It's just a delight to be here to even see it, you know what I mean?
It's not very loud, but it's good.
Tony Snell at breakfast.
You can't big this event up too much because it is going to be so awe-inspiring to see this.
It's absolutely boss. It was just amazing, the way they made it, and the detail of it is just amazing.
You can't realise the size of it until somebody's in front of it, and then you get the perspective.
She's awake and she's wearing a Liverpool and Everton scarf. This is it, the journey's just beginning.
Good afternoon. The Sea Oddysey is underway in Liverpool. So far, 2 giants, a girl and her dog Cholo, have been walking through the north area of the city. Our reporter Sam Clack is there for us this lunchtime.
The little girl giant has now come to rest on Everton ground.
The story's not just being performed here, it's rooted here. This is May McMurray and she lived around here 100 years ago.
May McMurray was a 10-year-old schoolgirl from Kensington. These are private family photos, never shown before. For the first time, we can see the real little girl behind the story. May was the daughter of William McMurray and his wife Clara. One of 3 children, she had a happy childhood in Liverpool and was very fond of her parents. In 1912, she wrote her father a simple letter.
The writing is just very beautiful and the penmanship's just, it is just lovely. It's just lovely to read. It's very poignant to read as well.
Days after she wrote it, her world was torn apart. And a century on, her story has brought Liverpool to a standstill. For May has become La Petite Géante, the little girl giant, in her home city with an uncle who needs to find her.
afternoon. There's now a third giant on the loose in Liverpool. Her deep-sea diving uncle has now emerged from the water at the Albert Dock. He's 50 foot.
If he was actually not a puppet and in real life, I would have been so scared that he was going to squash me.
Now the unexpected is happening. May's uncle has a special delivery. He's been diving on the wreck of the Titanic and has a letter from her father. In 1912, May's father, William, got a job on the luxury liner the Titanic. He'd always been at sea, and by now had earned the prestigious position of first-class bedroom steward.
William would have come into contact with, you know, some of the richest people in Edwardian society. People like the Guggenheims, the Astors. These were you know, multi-millionaires who were more than used to kind of crossing the globe regularly on business journeys. These were really the kind of movers and shakers of the day.
His wife Clara and the children would normally travel to the quayside to wave him off. But this day the children were sick and he went alone. Missing him, his 10-year-old daughter May wrote her first ever letter.
Dear Father, it seems ages since I last seen you. I wish we were in Southampton with you. It's very lonely without you, dear Father. I have not been so very well. I've had a bad throat. Hoping I'll soon get better. For Mama worries so much.
May wrote her letter to Dada on the 13th of April 1912. Unbeknown to her, the Titanic had already set sail, and 2 days later, this great liner would be sinking.
The next chapter of this story brings us here to France. 100 years after May wrote her letter, this ordinary girl from Liverpool is about to be portrayed in an extraordinary way. These workshops in Nantes are home to one of the world's greatest street theatre companies. Behind closed doors, actors, acrobats and inventors are putting together a production on a Titanic scale.
This is Jean-Luc, flamboyant, creative and a man with a job to do. He read May's letter in Liverpool. Now he wants to turn the tragedy into a fairy tale and says her home city is the place to do it.
Ooh. I think that's Liverpool. It's like an island, different from England. Out of the whole of England, it is a place with a very particular character.
She's human. That's why we can connect with her like human beings. And also when Little Giant it's in your city, people normally they never look up on the sky. We are always looking in front or down. And when the public looks the Little Giant, and you see your city in another way also.
À la fin de Liverpool, si j'ai
and at the end of Liverpool, if I succeed in telling a story, a true story, that brings people together, there you are. Then I'd be happy.
Bon, un rassemblement entre les gens et voilà, je serai heureux.
Little Annie's not been so well, but he's got better now. Hoping you'll keep him well, Daddy.
Sending her father a letter was such an ordinary thing for a little girl to do. Who would have thought that something so personal would have become so public? When May's letter reached the headquarters of the White Star Line, the Titanic had embarked on its maiden voyage. Her letter was returned to sender. It would never reach her father, and she would never see him again. Alan and William McMurray are the sons of May's baby brother Ernie. They believe their grandfather died a hero.
When the Titanic was sinking, my granddad was manning a lifeboat with an officer. The officer sent him back to look for water and biscuits, and he never returned. They couldn't wait any longer, and next thing was the officer said to a gentleman that was standing alongside, "You get into the lifeboat." The gentleman asked his name, and he eventually came back from New York to Liverpool and found out his address, met my grandmother and told her the tale of what had happened on board the ship.
So there's footage of the White Star officers here and all people waiting outside desperate for news that day to hear what happened to their loved ones. Do you think that your grandmother Clara would have come down with your father and your aunties to hear that information?
Most of the families we have found out were in New Brighton actually. There was chaps going around with these billboards saying that the Titanic had sunk, and I'm almost certain that my grandmother and the children would have gone to the White Star officers to listen to what was being said on the balconies, because she didn't have any information.
A very good morning from Liverpool, the city of giants. Here with the 11 o'clock news headlines, Julia Bold.
Good morning, and Liverpool is once again being overtaken by giants on day 2 of the Sea Odyssey. Just over an hour ago.
When we first saw her, she didn't have her jacket on. And I think, oh, she's cold. And they put the Mac on her, and then I was happy then.
Never seen nothing like this before, never.
The eye movements, the facial expressions, amazing.
And she's so pretty. I think the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life.
This is supposed to be May's Day, but it seems that somebody else is stealing the show.
The dog with his tongue hanging out and his ears waving round, really enjoyed that.
The dog is just crazy. It's fantastic, the dog, yeah.
The dog, because it's like me.
Those cheers are because he's now been attached to a huge crane and he's approaching the arch. Now, it's certainly a spectacular sight. The man is 50 feet high.
Wow, that was fantastic. He's just jumped over the arch. The atmosphere here is absolutely electric. Brilliant. This was the McMurray family home in Empress Road, Liverpool. When the news reached here that May's father, William, was presumed dead, his wife, Clara, was reported to have been prostrated with grief, had to be supported by sympathetic neighbours. It was 17th of April, 1912, their wedding anniversary. The Liverpool Daily Post said that even in her bereavement, Clara went back into the house and brought out this, a gallantry medal presented to William for saving lives when the steamship Republic sank on a previous voyage. Ironically, the Republic, like the Titanic, was a large and luxurious liner and was owned by the White Star Line. This is Albion House. house, which became the headquarters of the White Star Line. In 1912, when news of the Titanic came through, officials here were too afraid to leave the building and instead read out the names of the dead from the balcony.
Nicholas Housley is May's great-nephew. His mother, Ivy, was May's sister. He says the family never gave up hope that father might return.
Well, my grandmother told me that for many years after, they still expected her father to walk through the door, as he always had done on previous trips, although they never got closure for many years, and I guess they never got closure until Clara died, aged 37. And I think the finality was that mother and father have now both gone.
Lights will guide you home and ignite your bones, and I will try to fix you.
The little girl is just rounding the corner on her boat, coming into the King's Dock now. She's come all the way along the Strand. We've had heavy, heavy rain, and then we've had a bit of sunshine, and then we've had heavy rain, so the crowds have put up with an awful lot. They're also getting splashed at the moment by her boat, but it's been fantastic. There are so many people waiting to see what's going to happen next. And in the distance...
From my hometown, memories of phrase. From my hometown, ooh, the people I've made, how the wonders of my world, how the wonders of my world, how the wonders of this world are the wonders now.
And the moment they and the crowd have been waiting for, together at last.
Brought a tear to your eye when they finally met up. It's great to see.
It's when they finally met at the end. It's just dead sad.
Tear in your eye, definitely. It was really moving. I couldn't believe it.
The family say Clara never got over William's death. 3 years later, she died from leukemia. The children always said she died from a broken heart. Now orphaned, they were spared the poorhouse by their mother's sister, known only as Auntie. The family believed she travelled back from Buenos Aires, where she was married to an Argentine colonel. They also believed the family had money. However, documents in Liverpool's records office tell a very different story.
This is the Daily Post, and it actually mentions local members of the Titanic's crew. And here we have, is it William McMurray?
That's right, yes.
Who is a first-class bedroom steward of 60 Empress Road. And he says a sad case here, and he gets the biggest write-up.
These are the records from Liverpool's Titanic Relief Fund. The city's mayor would decide who most deserved financial help.
And we have one here from Mary Harrison, who was the relief collector who dealt with this, and it's dated July the 2nd, 1915. With regards to the children of Mrs. McMurray, their aunt is in a very worried state. She said it is quite impossible for her to manage on the amount of money she is now receiving, which is altogether £2, 10 shillings and 4pence a month. Can you imagine?
Oh, 3 children.
Yes.
And a home.
She's not at all in debt, having pawned some ornaments to pay the gas bill. And would like to get a cheaper house, but has no money to pay for removals.
The documents contain another surprise. Reference to Clara's will, leaving her 3 children, aged 12, 8 and 6 years, in the guardianship of her widowed sister, Mrs. Louisa Thorne, who had lived with them for many years.
So Auntie has a name at last, Mrs. Louisa Thorne. We don't know whether she had any links with Buenos Aires, but what we do know is that she'd been living with Clara and the children for some time, and that she was struggling to make ends meet.
Fred Macaulay was married to May's only child, Muriel. Sorting through her things after her death, he found May's original letter and donated it to Merseyside Maritime Museum.
We have a bit of a sort out in Mothers. We come across this letter, and I'd also heard about it from her. She talked to me several times about it, but she never actually showed it to me. And I said, that's the letter your mum was, and it had the envelope with it. The envelope had been torn. And she opened, I couldn't believe it was in such good condition, and she's a good writer.
How would May feel about the fact that Liverpool's going to come to a standstill and her story's going to be told?
She'd have been tickled pink. She never talked about it for all that.
No.
Never said, Dad did this or Dad did that. So.
And how would she want to be remembered?
A good citizen. I think that's probably the way I'd put it. If you wanted help, she'd help you. She could be a bit of a narc when she wanted to be. But in the main, she was pretty good. No doubt about that. Yes, I think she's earned her place in the world.
Why do you think this story still resonates today?
I think there's a number of reasons people are fascinated by Titanic, and we sometimes talk about the kind of the technology of the ship and the glamour and the opulence, but I think for me it really comes down to just these kind of individual human stories, just that realisation that these are real men, women and children and families who are sort of lost and saved and separated, and I think people can really identify with that kind of idea of ordinary people caught up in these kind of catastrophic global events. And I think that's something that still kind of resonates with people a century later.
Good morning, and the Giants are stirring. The final day of the Sea Odyssey event is just getting underway. The 30-foot little girl giant, her dog and her 50-foot uncle have spent the night asleep at the King's Dock. Our reporter Jessica Robbins.
It's been like an explosion, a cavalcade of what looks like envelopes and letters has just exploded here at the King's Dock and is floating across the skyline here across
Today's the day she swore to steal what she never could own and race from this hole she calls home.
Today, May's relatives are on board a tall ship, part of a flotilla saying goodbye to the Giants.
So lads, Liverpool's come to a standstill today. How does that make you feel?
Fantastic.
Marvellous.
I came down on Friday and just at the Albert Dock there, and to see all the kids, with the dog, It was absolutely brilliant. It really was fantastic.
May is magnificent. The size of it is unbelievable. And it brings it all to life, really. When you see those three big giants walking through the city, it really tugs at your heartstring when we realise this letter's about our auntie who wrote that to her father on the Titanic, and unfortunately he never received that letter.
In plot 21 at Springwood Crematorium, May McMurray's ashes are scattered along with those of her husband and her only daughter. Today, nothing marks the spot. There are no flowers, no plaque, in fact nothing to say that she ever existed. But she did, and we know she did, thanks to a letter and the giant who came to find her.
Dada, this is my first letter. Love from all, Dada. Hoping to see you soon. With love from Ivy and May and Ernie. Kisses for Dada.
Coming up at 10, the Met Office says it's the wettest April since records began. After a weekend of storms, more heavy rain expected, but there's still no end to the drought.
Heavy though the rain has been in some parts, the groundwater levels are still incredibly low.
The rain has been relentless in areas like Gloucestershire for days now, but why isn't all this water enough to bring our drought to an end?
Join us for the whole story at 10.
Good evening and welcome to a special Shakespearean edition of QI.
Shakespeare is a kind of bridge between two cultures.
Somehow this Englishman managed to capture the true essence of us Italians.
What are you looking for, Simon?
Well, a sense that Shakespeare's language is of our time.
Radiance revealing Frenchwoman. Frenchwoman is a bit of a stretch. Invented it.
How does one man continue to inspire so many?
To convey the words, the emotion surrounded by his inmates. Pure theatre.
Shakespeare Unlocked continues. Shakespeare in Italy starts Thursday at 9 on BBC Two.
This task is all about smelling what's selling.
Extractable, extendable, blue super mop.
£2 a go now, cost price, let's clear them.
There doesn't seem to be any strategy. You didn't learn what was selling. You're fired.
The Apprentice continues Wednesday at 9 on BBC One and catch up on BBC iPlayer.
A world of fear and loathing. Now on BBC One, Silent Witness is possessed, and from the start includes scenes you may find disturbing.
I'm not going on holiday to find myself or lose myself. I'm going to Essex, for God's sake.
Are you going to see Sean?
That's the girl you asked me about. They may never know how she died. Her heart just stopped.
Eve Gilson was a patient for 6 months pro bono, and then she didn't show up for a session.
Thought that her death was suspicious, but you didn't tell me. Why not?
You've been playing me from the start. You present yourself as a disinterested party expert pathologist. Meanwhile, you've been withholding key information from the investigation.
My colleagues found injuries on Eve.
You think I did something to her? You think I heard? That's the filth in your head!
Is it in us? Is it in my son?
He didn't choose to be blind. It's not his fault.
It's nobody's fault, Eve.
Is that right?
I was treating her, Leo. Now she's dead.
But your conscience is clear.
No, I didn't say that.
Guys. Prince Arthur.
Gonna do? Plan for lunch? Oh. Yes. I'm Gwen. A busy day ahead. Yes, my lady.
Perhaps you were right, guys. Perhaps I should never have gotten